seated. This time I'm going to invite Brad Repass to come forward, and he is going to help me with the sermon this morning. Your mic, I think, is up there. I didn't want to shortchange the story of Joseph, so we're going to give you more text than sermon this morning and weave it in a way that hopefully really lets it drive the beauty of the story home for you. So I will have Brad begin, and then we will do our part.
This morning's first reading comes from Genesis 37, 3 through 8, and 12 through 14. Abraham's grandson Jacob, also known as Israel, had 12 sons. Jacob loved one son more than the others, which caused no end of strife between the brothers. It is written, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, 'Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf.' His brothers said to him, 'Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?' So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. Now his brothers went to pasture their flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing their flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' He answered, 'Here I am.' So he said to him, 'Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me.' So he sent him from the valley of Hebron."
After Joseph finds his brothers, they put their plan into action. At first, the majority of the brothers thought it'd be a great idea to just kill him, because that'll take care of it. But Reuben, having compassion or maybe being too afraid of his father Jacob, for whatever reason intervened and said, "No, let us not shed his blood, but yes, let's throw him in a pit." So Joseph is thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, and into the household of Potiphar in Egypt, where Potiphar's wife has Joseph thrown into jail because he would not receive her advances. Joseph meets fellow prisoners and befriends them, even becomes a leader among prisoners, and he interprets dreams for them. One is released back to his position and does not forget Joseph when Pharaoh is tormented by dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams as a warning for famine, and Pharaoh makes Joseph one of his chief superintendents or leaders. Thrown into a pit, thrown into jail, brought to the side of a king. But it seems every time Joseph trusts someone, he is betrayed and thrown somewhere. Can you identify with this? Have you trusted someone? Have you loved someone only to experience great pain at their betrayal? Have you felt like you have been thrown into a pit of sadness or depression because someone made a choice and it wounded you? It's a very human, it's a very common experience for all of us. At worst, Joseph was an annoying kid with a different mother, at worst. But in the ancient world, you were given privilege and honor based on your social status, and social status was based on birth order. It was also determined because of who would inherit the father's resources. Joseph was younger, but was given higher honor by his father. But see, Jacob really wasn't in a good place to be judging either. Because remember Jacob, the trickster? He tricked his brother into giving up his birthright so he, the younger, could receive their father's inheritance. A younger brother who schemed his way to a better place. But Joseph wasn't a schemer. He was actually very naive. Maybe his dad wanted a different outcome for him based on Jacob's own experiences. But regardless, Joseph was cast aside and rose again in Egypt.
Our next reading comes from Genesis 45, 1 through 9, and verses 11 through 13. Years later, Joseph has become a high official in the court of the Egyptian Pharaoh, in charge of distributing grain during a famine. Joseph's brothers have come to Egypt to buy grain, but they have not recognized Joseph. On this, their second visit, Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers. It is written. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they were closer. He said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his houses and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt, and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here.'"
After all that, he still just wants his daddy to be proud of him. Tell Dad I did something with my life. Tell him I have done things that he can be proud of. But with all the things and all the accolades and all the power that Joseph has, he doesn't gloat over his brothers. He doesn't rub it in. Actually, he's overwhelmed by emotion, and he hides himself from them at first. He's concerned with Benjamin, maybe not trusting his brothers as he and Benjamin shared the same mother. But he has not cut the ties to his family, even though his brothers were so cruel, and he intervenes and saves all their lives. He was faithful to something greater than the actions or the mistakes of his family. Where's the takeaway for us? Joseph did not define himself by the evil that was done to him. Joseph refused to live as a victim. He trusted God, and he kept going.
Psalm 105, verses 1 through 5, and 16 through 24. Psalm 105 recalls God's faithfulness to God's people throughout history. The section we hear today remembers how God worked through Joseph, God's faithfulness to Israel. "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell all of his wonderful works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord in his strength, seek his presence continually. Remember the wonderful works he has done, his miracles, and the judgments he has uttered. When he summoned famine against the land and broke every staff of bread, he had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters, his neck was put in a collar of iron. Until what he had said came to pass, the word of the Lord kept testing him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the peoples set him free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to instruct his officials at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. Then Israel came to Egypt. Jacob lived as an alien in the land of Ham, and the Lord made his people very fruitful and made them stronger than their foes."
Joseph establishes a strong presence in Egypt for the Hebrew people. In fact, we read further down the story into the book of Exodus, and we find that the Hebrew people were growing their families in rapid succession and in great numbers. The Pharaoh at that time decided that they needed to be oppressed and enslaved so that their numbers would never overthrow the Egyptian people. So if you've ever wondered when you read the story of Moses and the Exodus, how did they get to Egypt anyway? Now you know. The Pharaoh decided this, but it's not anything that stopped with that time period. The white Dutch descendants did the same thing during apartheid in South Africa to the indigenous blacks, fearing that their larger numbers would overthrow the government someday. The envy of the brothers was actually fear. You see, fear can make people do very cruel things. And the brothers of Joseph were afraid that he would inherit their father's household. And there was limited resources. So once he had inherited, there was nothing left to share with them. So they were afraid. When Joseph comes to his brothers to save them from famine, he doesn't repay evil with anger or with violence. He responds to his brothers in love. And we remember the words of the Christ who would say, "Perfect love casts out all fear." But it would still take a little time for Joseph's brothers to come around.
Our final reading is from Genesis 50, verses 15 through 21. Joseph's father and brothers all moved to Egypt, where Joseph provided for them. When Jacob died, the brothers worried that Joseph would seek revenge. It is written, realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, 'I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father.' Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also wept, fell down before him, and said, 'We are here as your slaves.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones.' In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them."
They were afraid that it was this quite elaborate scheme for Joseph to get revenge on them for what they had done to him many years before. I'd like to end our time together this morning with one more observation, and it's, I think, the most problematic in this text, and it's that theme that God purposely pulls the strings to cause our suffering. I mean, if you read these just the way it's written, it's there. It really is. There's no denying that. But when we dig a little deeper into the Hebrew, there is a beautiful and wonderful truth that is hidden in plain sight about some of these words. I'll draw your attention to chapter 50, verse 20, and it reads, "Even though you intended to do no harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he's doing today." It's easy to interpret this as God pulling strings to make Joseph fall in a pit, make his brothers jealous, because the end will justify the means. It's easy to interpret that way, but this is dangerous. It's a dangerous thought to interpret it this way, because I think it goes against who God really is. Remember the Garden of Eden. In that moment, humanity is either blessed with free will or cursed with it, your choice on how you'd like to see it. But we can choose, and God will not override our choices. So the word chasab, translated intended, for God and for Joseph's brothers, is the exact same word. But one of the other translations for chasab means to weave. As today we've celebrated the blanket ministry, God weaves a blanket in our lives too. We humans weave things together, sometimes for evil, sometimes just plain mistakes, but our desire sometimes is also to do harm to others. But God weaves for good. Even while we are working on things that break, hurt, destroy, and separate, God is weaving in the opposite direction, making the lines secure, in order to use even our evil to restore, heal, build up, and unite. God weaves bright colors into the tapestry of our lives, even while others are weaving in dark, depressing colors. God doesn't work in evil, but can overcome any evil with good. And all things can be given over to God to redeem and to heal. If you've ever wounded someone, if you've hurt them and betrayed them with the love that they gave you, God weaves for you. If you have ever experienced such loss that it knocked the joy right out of your heart, stole your hope and made you feel like you were trapped in a pit of it will never get better, God weaves for you. God weaves for all of us, because each and every one of us are all God's favorites. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.